Hey everybody, it's time for another question and answer video. This time I'm going to focus mostly on fertilizing and watering because that's where most of your comments are coming from. That seems to be what a lot of people are struggling with. I have a couple other topics that I'll try to cover as well, but I'm going to focus on those two because I think that's where people really need some help right now. So the first question is actually twofer. There's two questions that are kind of related. So first one comes from T Good. This says, unfortunately, I can't seem to get my potted flowers to get so big. I use the same fertilizers, water myself daily, not sure what I'm doing wrong. And then the other one comes from Doreen. It says, what fertilizer do you use? I use fertilizer and water my hanging baskets and they never look that big. So first thing I want to point out is that they're talking about, they never look that good or they never get that big. If their plants are healthy, then I'm going to probably say that they need to look at the varieties that they're choosing because some varieties just aren't super vigorous. So they're going to be healthy, but they don't get bigger and you can't get them to, suddenly become a super vigorous variety just by fertilizing and watering. You need to just change varieties. So that's the most likely culprit in that type of situation. Although I did get one red flag when you say I water daily. I don't ever say water daily. I say water when your plants need it. So there's going to be times of the year when we're going to only need to water our plants, once every 3 days. There's going to be times when we have to water them every day. There's going to be times when we have to water them twice a day. And so that's also very important. So it's valuable for you to be checking the moisture in your plants and watering them when they need it. So if you're underwatering or overwatering, that can also reduce the performance of your plants as well. So there are other factors, like you could have bugs or you could have some other things going on, but those would be the first things that I would look at. Next question comes from Florida Marion. It's good to know I'm not the only one who has plants that don't grow perfectly. Your baskets mostly look great. I enjoy watching your gardening. I get lots of tips. And I just wanted to point that out because I am not the perfect gardener. I do not have perfect containers, and anyone who tells you that they've never had a basket fail or a plant fail in a basket, they're not giving you the whole truth. There's probably a whole story behind that. And it does seem a lot of times, I think, when you're watching YouTube and we're seeing other gardeners and they're just showing us their successes and success after success after success, just remember there's things happening behind the scenes. They're removing the ugly plants. They're turning the containers to show you the nicer side. I even do that, like sometimes the other side. I might not show it to you just because it's like, it looks okay, but this is where we want to really be looking at it. And then I have actually seen some YouTubers where I'm like, I remember when you planted that, and that is not the same Calibrachoa variety that you had in there. Similar color, looks almost the same, but I know it's different, so I have seen people do that too, and they just don't mention it. Their choice if they swapped it out, that's just how it goes. But I try not to do that. I don't think I've been pretty straightforward with you guys. Yeah, I have. Anyway, let me get back to this. Mike C writes, Corey, I bought a bunch of coleus from an online nursery, and when I received them, they were all healthy and still are, but some I planted in peat pots, and they are much smaller than the ones I planted right into a container. I'm guessing a plastic container or a ceramic container. I was wondering, are the peat pots holding back the growth? This, I suspect, has to do with the fact that the peat pots are porous, and so chances are the water is evaporating from them faster, so it's probably a watering issue. They're just not getting as much water as the ones in the container. That's my theory on it. So I would guess that if you gave them a little bit more water, if they're in the same size container and they're getting the same nutrients, they should be performing similarly. But if more of that water is evaporating, or if that peat pot is holding more water, like if you have it in a drip tray and that drip tray is holding some water, that could also be causing it to hold extra water too, that you might not have as much in a plastic container or another container. So something to think about. I'm guessing it has to do with watering and either evaporation or holding too much water. That's my theory. Next one is Cecilia Fuller asks, where can I get the fertilizer beads that you put during replanting? So this was a video where I had taken some petunias and I had split some up and I had mixed some up and took kind of small ones and put them into a container, and I had put some time release fertilizer. So that time release that I put in there, it would be the equivalent of just the Osmocote time release pellets or beads or whatever, and I just add those based on the directions on the container. So that's what I would sometimes put in some of my containers. She also asks, would you recommend cutting off the flowers of perennials as well when you transplant, or is this something you do for petunias? I have a bunch of perennials and I'm about to transplant them into the bed. So normally I don't do much trimming on perennials when I'm planting them. I just find if I put them in there, I don't want to give them extra stress. And because perennials tend to, like, a lot of them might only have one flush of flowers, or, you know, they're more timed, or they have a more strict bloom time, I usually don't want to mess with that, you know, whereas annuals are always sending up, you know, new branches and new blooms and new growth. So I kind of want to focus, you know, let those perennials kind of get on their cycle. So I usually don't. However, like a lot of times perennials, when they're being grown, they're either being grown like in a greenhouse where they never get any wind, or they're being grown really tight where there's lots of plants nearby. And so sometimes the branches can be a little bit weaker. And so then when you plant them out, like within a day, they start kind of laying down, or one windy day or one rainy day, and they kind of flop. If I'm worried about them flopping, sometimes I will trim them right away, just knowing that I have to get that taken care of. Or I wait a day or two, like I might wait 4 days or something like that, and then go, oh yeah, I got to give that a little bit of a trim. So otherwise though, I don't do a lot of trimming with my perennials when I put them in, unless I really feel I have to. It's kind of one of those things, you just kind of start talking to your plants a little, going like, okay, what do you really want from me? Like, do you want these branches here or do you not? You know, that's kind of my way of doing it. I talk to my plants. Marcy Novak writes, what do I do about earwigs in all of my containers? They are destroying what I'm trying to build. Every pot I fuss with, like when I'm deadheading, or there's always something that needs to get squished, and I get a load of earwigs that fall out. And I can relate to this because I was in the hydrangeas in the driveway yesterday, and just like where the buds were just starting to come out, there were just little earwigs like cupped in there, just hanging out. And there is nothing more like horror movie monster looking than like an earwig with those pinchers, and you know, they're a weird looking kind of creature, and so very annoying as well. And they do a lot of damage, especially like to our petunias. We have them on our hydrangeas. They're kind of all over the place. We use Sluggo Plus, not just Sluggo, Sluggo Plus, Captain Jack's Bug and Slug, the Fertilome Come and Get It Slug and Bug or something like that. Those all tend to work. They have something in that attracts them. So you want to look on the container, make sure it says earwigs. There are other ones, like there's some systemics and also some granulars that you can put around them, and that also will be listed for earwigs. I don't do any sprays for earwigs. I don't know, there might be sprays that would work, but the other things have always worked for us. The only thing is like usually, like when it comes to the Sluggo Plus and those types, like we call them the little marshmallow ones, we only put a couple in, and then we go back the next day, check to see if they're still there, because if you have a lot of earwigs, they will be gone the next day. So then we just keep adding them as necessary. I do not like putting that big pile of Sluggo or similar products in there, because if the bugs don't eat them, then you end up with like a moldy mess, and it looks very unattractive on your plants. So just, you know, checking on them and getting them in there, that's a lot easier than having a big mush pile later on. And Nicholas Ryan writes, we have 52 containers of perennials and 6 containers of annuals. We feed them all with tomato food once a week. When we started gardening with containers, we used to use Miracle-Gro, but the plants would be covered with aphids who are attracted to the plants with the higher nitrogen levels. Tomato food has a 639 NPK, and we don't get as many aphids. And I've heard this before, that it is the new growth that the aphids are most attracted to. So by having a little bit less nitrogen in your fertilizer, it discourages that new growth a little bit, or limits it, and makes it a little bit less attractive to aphids. I haven't tested this, I don't know for sure, but I have heard it not only from this viewer, but also from other people before. So that might be something to try if you are fighting the aphids. You know, reduce that growth a little bit, and then you're not creating an environment that they like as much. So they'll move on hopefully to something else, and hopefully not something that you don't want them on. Hopefully they go off far away. So when I started looking up tomato fertilizers, I realized that those NPK numbers on tomato feeds can range a lot depending on the brand, and I didn't want this advice to kind of confuse you even more. So I went through and wanted to clarify a little bit. So what Nicholas was doing was comparing his tomato feed to, say, Miracle-Gro. So the NPK numbers on Miracle-Gro, the regular Miracle-Gro, is 24,816, and the Bloom Booster is 15,3015. Now Nicholas recommended an 639. So you can see quite a difference in the number. So that, I'm going to say potency, but that's not necessarily the right way to describe fertilizer, but the ratio or the numbers are quite a bit lower, and that's what Nicholas is recommending, and that's the advice I've heard from other people, that, you know, lowering that nitrogen number, which is the first number, is helpful in reducing that new growth, and reducing that new growth can end up reducing your risk of aphids. Now, that said, not fertilizing at all isn't good either, because if your plants are weakened because they're not getting any fertilizer, that's going to also attract different types of bugs. It might not be the aphids, it'll be something else. So don't drop your fertilizer all at once. You can either switch completely to maybe this lower numbered fertilizer, or maybe when you know aphid season is coming around, you start lowering it. There's a lot of different ways. Like I said, I haven't done experiments in this, I haven't tested this, but I have heard this advice from other people. You guys have left it in the comments as well, that high fertilizing can result in problems with aphids. So just wanted to put that out there. Otherwise, when it comes to aphids, I have used a lot of different products. So I used Mite X, which is kind of organic. I've used Neem Oil. And then when I really want something more powerful, there's a BioAdvanced 3-in-1 that I've sprayed with. I usually try to avoid that one because it is kind of a kills all kind of bug spray that's out there. But sometimes, when we really want to try to protect our plants, that's what we do. But usually I just go the other way, or I just let the aphids run their course. A lot of people also say if you spray them off with the hose or try to pinch them off with your fingers, that reduces the population enough that like an infestation really goes down significantly. I don't know. Aphids are a pain. We don't usually have a problem with them, but this year we are, so it's kind of new to me as well. But those are all the little bits that I've heard about aphids. Sorry to go off on this tangent, but I just want to make sure that I clarified a little bit of that info there. And this other question comes from Lynn K. And Lynn writes, what about perennials? Should I fertilize them now too? Some of my new hydrangeas have brown dried up leaves. Should I snip those off? Okay, so perennials, I don't use the liquid fertilizer that I use in my annuals. Now you can. I wouldn't use it every week like you do with annuals. Perennials don't need that much. But if that's easier for you, giving them that liquid fertilizer once a month probably would be fine. I can't imagine it being too bad. But in general, what I would do, every spring I try to add a little layer of compost to all my perennials and my shrubs, and then I just add time-release fertilizer, the pellets. I just go for the regular like rose food type of time-release pellets and just put those out as directed, and they seem to work for me. There are some plants though that like specific types of fertilizer. I'm thinking specifically of like rhododendrons, azaleas, blueberries. There's probably other ones as well. When you go to the fertilizer aisle, it's the ones that have the special logo. Although with some of the berry tone and holly tone and those kind of things, some of those are actually just the same fertilizers repackaged, but it sometimes is reassuring to know that you're getting the right fertilizer for the right plant. But for most of your flowering shrubs and your perennials, it's going to be fine to use like just that regular rose food. That's kind of what I do, and it has served me well. There are several perennials though that I don't ever really add much fertilizer to. So echinacea, sedum, there's probably a couple others. I can't think of them right off the top of my head, but those I don't really give them any fertilizer, and they prefer it that way. So if you ever see on the tag where it says does well in poor soil, if you see the words poor soil, don't bother fertilizing them. They don't need it. You're going to be wasting your money. And in fact, with like sedums, actually, if you over fertilize them, that's when they start looking weird. They start to get like long and curly and laying down in weird colors. So good idea not to fertilize those. So that helps. Now, as far as your hydrangeas with the brown tips, that probably was due to moisture. They probably got dried out, and that's pretty common with a hydrangea. That's their defense, is they start kind of browning off the leaves. They sacrifice some of their leaves, or the leaves just turn yellow and then they fall off. And so if you have that, you can leave them. That's not going to hurt. Or if they're unattractive, you can remove them. You just don't want to remove every single leaf on the plant. If it's a panicle variety or an arborescent, I know those kind, I have no qualms about trimming those back at any time of the year. I probably wouldn't do it when it's super hot out because the plant's already stressed, but on a regular day or on a cloudy day, going in and giving them a trim back, actually usually they're going to be fine with that. So if they're looking unattractive, or if you have a broken branch or something's wrong with them, you can trim those back and they'll just reshoot and keep going. You might lose flowers and you might set them back, but you can trim those back at any time. I'm not as familiar with macrophyllus and corsifolias, so the mophead big leaf hydrangeas and the oak leaf hydrangeas, because those don't do so well by us, so I can't speak to those. But I know for the other two, you can trim those off if you find them unattractive. And it's back to that talking to your plant. If you're looking at that leaf and you're going, this leaf is not helping this plant at all, it's not photosynthesizing, or 3/4 of it is brown, I usually just get those off because they're unattractive and I don't think they're doing much for the plant. So I kind of negotiate with the plant, and the plant usually lets me know. And if the plant doesn't let me know, well, then I just got to make a call. That's kind of where I'm at with that. Next question comes from Jean Arwater. Can you please give some tips on watering in-ground annuals and perennials? I don't have a lawn sprinkler or a drip line, just a garden hose. It's been such a hot summer already in Chicago, and I think I've been overwatering for fear of flowers dying. I have shade perennials in the backyard and full sun annuals in the front. Okay, so your plants that are in ground have a bit of an advantage over your plants in containers because they can get some moisture from around them, but if that soil around them is very, very dry, you have to remember this is a hydrodynamics thing. Water tends to kind of dissipate, tends to spread out more evenly. So if you're giving those plants lots of water, like those ones in the shade, and you overwater them, they're at an advantage because that water will gradually kind of pull away from those plants. So not a terribly big problem. However, you do want to check the moisture in the soil around it. So you're going to just check if it's really damp all the time, give them a little break, and even if that means, instead of watering in the morning, I'm going to just risk it. I think the soil's wet. I'm going to just check them when I get home from work. You should be okay if that soil is pretty moist when you leave for work or leave in the morning, that type of thing. The ones in the front with the sunny, I mean, your climate is even, hotter than ours right now, and I don't think you're going to be overwatering any of those plants in the front yard. How do you fertilize those? And I think that question might come up, or this might be part of this one. Basically, what I do is I just fill my 5-gallon buckets with my fertilized water. So I'm using Beat Your Neighbor fertilizer, so I use 1 scoop per gallon. So a 5-gallon bucket gets 5 scoops, add my water, and then I just go around and I have my 4-cup measure and I just pour it on top of those plants or pour it underneath the leaves whenever I can. I keep it really simple, and usually that 4-cup measure works out pretty well. If it's really, really dry though, I just keep giving it water until I feel satisfied with the amount of water around there. Again, remember, if the soil around your plants is super dry, anything that you water on your plant is going to be pulled to those drier areas as well. So it's not a bad idea to focus on kind of getting the water around your plants, also a good amount of moisture in there. So you could also use sprinklers or drip line hoses. You can put those even on a timer so you don't have to invest in a really fancy watering system. You can just use it for those hottest times if you need to. That's an option, but it sounds like you're paying good attention to your plants, so that's important. I think what you want to really look for is what kind of stress are they under. So if they're performing fine, you're doing fine. If they're looking stressed, and usually one of the biggest signs of overwatered plants is wilt. So don't mistake wilting for drying out. So you're going to want to check that soil. Anytime you see wilt, if you're worried about overwatering, check to see if they are overwatering, because that wilt can really deceive you. Because they look almost the same when you're overwatering as when they're underwatering. And underwatering, usually they'll wilt and then they dry out. Overwatering, they just wilt and they wilt more and they wilt more until they pretty much die a slow death. So that's my suggestion there. Now this next question comes from Bowler8, and this was on the video that I had done about how I fertilize my annuals. So I had gone through my whole process, and the comment was, none of this fuss happens in Europe. Look at their real hanging baskets. And as someone who, over the last 15 years, 10 of those years I've spent at least 5 months out of the year in Europe, so I can attest there are some incredible hanging baskets there. So I've seen them, I've witnessed them, but I've also seen some of the saddest, most underperforming baskets I've ever seen in Europe as well. So Europe does not corner the market on incredible containers and baskets and things like that. And I have to tell you that those incredible mixed containers that you see in different parts of Europe, those are all getting fertilized. I guarantee it, whether it's already in the soil that they're using or it's supplemental, and it's probably supplemental, it is getting abundant fertilizer, because most of those plants would not fare so well without it. And now there is the fact that, if you put a plant in its perfect environment, it will excel without much help from us. That is true. However, a mixed container like those, I suspect there's fertilizer going in there. And I can speak to that specifically because I have a neighbor in Ireland, and she has the most beautiful containers. Her driveway, I mean, they're just overflowing. They're absolutely gorgeous. And so I ask her, I'm like, oh, what's your secret? What's your fertilizer? And I probably have asked her 3 different times. And every time she says, oh, that's all they get is water from the sky. And I'm like, oh, that's a very magical answer and satisfying, I guess, in that kind of, mystical kind of way. But I also know that in her garage, or they call it a garage, in her garage, she has an entire shelf dedicated to fertilizers and amendments and all that kind of stuff. So I know she's putting stuff on there, but you know, she wants me to believe that it's just the magic touch or something. I'm not sure. So I do kind of find that a little bit humorous. And I think that it can be common with a lot of gardeners. It happens with chefs too. You know, those people who, you know, make the gourmet dinner and they're like, oh, this, I just threw some things together from the fridge. And I'm like, really? You had like asparagus spears and prime rib? That's amazing. So I assure you, even if they're not revealing their secrets, people are giving them fertilizer. And just the fact that I'm willing to tell you what I do to get the results that I do, that's just my personality. Other people like to keep that a little private because, well, they like to be special, I think, sometimes. And hey, that's fine too. As long as we all get to enjoy their plants, it doesn't matter what their secret is and whether they're willing to share it or not. Doesn't matter. But I'm telling you my secrets, and hopefully those work for you as well. In the last Q&A, we had a question from someone who was just feeling overwhelmed from the idea of all this landscaping and trying to get everything looking perfect. And my suggestion was, hey, just pull back, focus on one area, focus on little things. And there have been some really wonderful comments that came from you guys regarding that. And I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to leave that message, because I think it means a lot to people to hear this. And so I'm going to start with Jean Plakowski. Boy, are you ever right about focusing on one area at a time. We bought property in Wisconsin and tried to do most of it at one time. The work we created for ourselves was ridiculous. We had to move or dismantle almost everything we originally did. It was exhausting. 10 years later, it's better, but now we focus on one, maybe two areas a season, along with keeping up with the established areas. It's a lot easier now. It's been a long time getting it to this point. And I think this just reinforces the fact that you need to just do those little bits, because in my opinion, then you're figuring out what you're good at. And once you figure out what you're good at, you're having successes. Whereas when you try to do everything at once, it feels like you're just being slammed with all the things you're not good at. And that can really bring you down. That's what's stressing you out. So again, focus on those little areas, get those successes. And I think that there was a good point here too, like figure out what the maintenance is on those so that you can then make judgments for future projects. Because if you're doing things that are just too much maintenance or you're not going to have time, you're going to be changing your choices for future projects as well. So important to think about that and to kind of just keep building on it. I'm totally behind that. Next comment's from Terry A. Pierce. Hello from Saskatchewan, the Canadian prairies. I love this video. And then she goes on, we have been on our acreage for 40 plus years, and people say our yard looks like a park, but it sure didn't happen all at once. I absolutely agree with your advice about planting and landscaping just a few low maintenance shrubs in the yard to start with, and maybe a pretty planter or basket to feed the soul, and it's not so overwhelming to take care of and is very gratifying. I'm glad I found your channel. Again, starting small, getting some pleasure out of that space rather than getting only the work and all that labor. I totally back this one as well. And this next comment comes from Peggy Ann, and she was talking about when I had transplanted into what was a self-watering pot, and it had a little disc thing, and I threw it out because I thought it was, garbage. Anyway, I would just like to reinforce what Corey said about the self-watering pots. We have two very large ones planted with petunias and Angara. A huge amount of rain completely flooded them to where the water was visible a good 2 inches above the soil. We manhandled them sideways, and my hubs drilled several holes in them, and the water poured out like a faucet, and it took days to drain. I have had this happen to me. I'll never again have any pot without bottom drainage. Thanks, Corey. Always fun to watch you repot the big guys. I know, I'm kind of getting in the habit of that. Anyway, I'm not against self-watering pots. I'm just against self-watering pots without drainage. And on that pot that I had used, it had the shelf. So there'd be soil above the shelf and water would kind of remain underneath. And the thinking is that water reservoir is going to feed your plant. But without a drainage hole, you don't know if you're at the platform or if you're 4 inches above it. You can drill holes in the sides right at the shelf level, so that way it gets drainage from that point. So anytime you overfill it, it will drain from the sides. Not ideal, but and then there's other ones that you have to look because they might have drainage holes kind of built in a way that you might not notice them right off the bat. So I'm not against self-watering, but I am against self-watering pots without drainage holes. I've fallen for it and I made the mistake, and there just is no way of knowing how much water is being held in there. It's really annoying. So I agree with you on that one. I also want to say thank you to Ronald Giard. There was a very nice super thanks in one of my videos, and I used that money to buy some of the creeping phlox that I'd used in my, the health strip area of the front yard that I had done. So thank you very much. You helped pay for a plant, and I am very grateful for that. And Michael Baldwin writes, YouTube is such a strange environment. We really do feel a connection to the people whose videos we watch. Thank you so much for opening up your background and life. I love your videos even more after knowing a little bit more about you. And it's interesting because after I posted that Q&A, I felt like the comments were more personal and you guys were sharing a little bit more. And that was really nice because I feel like the more I get to know you guys, the easier it is to come on here and talk to. I feel like I know exactly who I'm talking to. Like right now, I'm like picturing like 10 chairs and there's 10 of you sitting here and we're just talking, and you're gonna comment back and you're gonna have to do it through the comments right now, but I'm kind of imagining that you guys are ready like for the Q&A, live Q&A afterwards, like you're gonna start asking questions. But I really do feel like you're almost in the garden with me, and I think that's what we have in common, is this garden space, and it's just really nice. And I appreciate all the comments. I appreciate you guys watching. Genuinely do. Like, this has really been an interesting experience being on YouTube and building you know, an audience and having people comment, and it's very, very, very nice. And this last comment was left in my previous Q&A, and it's from Esarmati. Not sure how you want that pronounced, but anyway, this was so interesting. My daughter has a graphic design degree. Hearing what other creative jobs can use this skill really made my day. Thank you for sharing personal details. I feel social media only gives us the happy content, but really we can learn from hearing others handle life in general and feel not so alone. And it's interesting that you say that, and I think a lot of parents have some anxiety when their children are talking about creative careers, whether it's graphic design or artistry or floral design or landscaping design or even owning a nursery or a business, something entrepreneurial. I think, it's natural for you to feel some anxiety, but you do have to trust that your kids are going to be able to build the skills and make the decisions to be able to make it work. And I will say, from my personal experience, graphic design, and I think a lot of other of the creative fields, really tie in with what that might be your primary skill, but whatever your secondary skill really is what makes you stand out, I guess, in that field. So every secondary skill, I think, is what makes entrepreneurs and artists really kind of rise to the top. So you just have to realize that like, if your kid is telling you, like, I want to be an artist, or I want to be a floral designer, or I want to own a nursery, your first reaction shouldn't be, how are you going to make a living off of that? Like, that's not what it's all about. It's more like, oh, well, what skills do you need to have to make that success, and what skills do you already have that you're going to be able to build on? For me, I might be a decent graphic designer, but it was the other skills that I have that I think have made me more successful. And I have worked with a lot of creatives as well, and a lot of entrepreneurs, and I definitely see it. So some people, and I'm thinking of specific people when I say this, some of them are really skilled at writing and English, so that they can do their creative stuff, but those other skills make them really good at working with certain types of people, and also kind of working in certain types of environments as well. Also, there's some people who just have a business sense, like they just can do the books and the numbers. They're really good at that in addition to their creative background. So that's an advantage that they have. Some people are just masters at marketing. They can just make decisions that really work every single time, and I'm always amazed. Some people are just really good at social media. I think you have to look at the whole person when you're dealing with someone who's creative or entrepreneurial, and realize, like, they have so many skills and they just have to put them all to work. I will say that artists and entrepreneurs probably need to be a little bit more disciplined than the average person that goes out, to their 9-to-5 job, because they don't have someone always, on them. They're not going to get written up type of thing. If they don't do it, they're just not going to get the work done. But that said, also, there's a lot of graphic designers and other creative people who work in corporate jobs. So I know graphic designers who work at insurance companies and hospitals and places like that, and they're just in-house designers, and their job is 9 to 5. Their pay is comparable to other people who work in the offices in those environments. They have all those benefits and stuff, so they have a lot less maybe risk. Sometimes they'll tell me, like, oh, sometimes I wish I wasn't in corporate America, but they're also not sacrificing some of the perks that comes along with that, and some of the stability is kind of the big thing. So I just wanted to leave with that because it is something that's near and dear to my heart. I've never really been totally like on the traditional career path. I've always had side gigs, side hustles going on, and I've had some that were successes, some that weren't, and I don't know, just thought I'd share those with you. So I will talk to you guys all very, very soon. There'll be another Q&A coming up very soon. And thank you guys. I really do appreciate you taking the time to watch the videos, leave your comments, and just hang out with me for a little while.